It is no easy task to survive as an independent sovereign entity. I guess some of us could draw exactly that conclusion of our private experience, even let alone social. So, what does it take for such a complex, multi-level political, social and economical construct as a country to sustain its sovereignty? Why sovereignty is important in the first place? And in terms of Ukraine, which is protruding not without success through the existential war with a far larger enemy, Russia, how do recent events and global political events horizon affect that fight for Ukrainian sovereignty? Today we talk to a French civil servant, academic, writer and editor, Nicolas Tenzer. Bonjour, monsieur.
A great pleasure to be with you again.
Thank you so very much for finding time. What Ukraine is fighting for, some still do not understand. Can you believe that? I mean, just recently I heard it from someone I thought I knew them well. Why wouldn't Ukraine just let go and live under Russian colors, under Russian flag? Is it worth the blood, they were asking? And they were saying exactly that. It's just colors or the flag, right? Well, you, sir, being French, a nation that values freedom above all over tyranny and proved it many times in history, and today being one of the most staunch Ukrainian allies, France, what would you answer to that?
Well, my answer will be basically that's a fight between good and evil. And I think that we have to understand, the war launched by Russia against Ukraine on those precise terms. It's all, of course, about freedom. It's about, the rule of law. It's about, the independence of states, about, the ability for each citizen to choose its own path towards liberty and independence. But more than that, I think it's all about the principles we in Europe are supposed to stand for. Because if we consider what Russia is doing in Ukraine, and before what it did in Chechnya, what it did in Syria, what it's still doing in Africa, in Georgia, etc., right. It's about, a purpose of total destructions, annihilations of human life. So it's a fight about good and evil, but it's also a fight about human lives, lives against death. And I think we have to understand this war through those radical terms. Either we win, and I say we because I think that's basically Ukraine, Europe, the freedom, the free world, all the countries who are standing for open societies and democracy, or we lose. There is absolutely no middle way, no middle term. Some people are still talking about, the projects of peace, about, negotiations, are saying that we have to bring Putin back to the negotiation table, etc., etc. But I think that's completely meaningless because we perfectly know that Putin will not negotiate, cannot negotiate, and to negotiate on what? There is nothing to negotiate. We have basically to have a plan for victory and nothing else.
I couldn't agree more. But to me, it's just not happening in the amount that it should be happening yet. Well, I mean, all right, let's put it straightforward. Poland and that 20 plus Russian drones that violated airspace, whatever could have been violated, it violated also the Article 5, the common sense, and any imaginable international law. But do you think, sir, the NATO and EU and Poland's answer to that was enough? And what was that answer, really?
I think the answer remains insufficient. I know that France has sent 3 Rafale fighter jets, to Poland, and that's a kind of answer. But in fact, I think we have basically to shut down all the drones and missiles that are violating Ukrainian airspace, but of course, Polish airspace, Romanian airspace, etc. Because we perfectly know that the purpose of Russia is not only Ukraine. It doesn't stop in Ukraine. It's something which is basically wider. And if we are not showing, we in Europe, enough resolve, I think then we will fail because Putin will feel emboldened by the passivity of the ally. Just look what happened in Romania recently. We have a drone that remained, in the airspace, of Romania during half an hour. And the drone then said, well, okay, I will go back to Ukraine. I mean, this drone should have been basically down in Romania. All the drones should be also down, in Poland. I am one of the ones who signed very recently, 2 weeks ago, an appeal launched by some persons in France and signed right now by many MPs, MEPs, very senior military staff. I mean, many generals in France. I mean, retired general, but still, I mean, very important person who worked with NATO in very top positions, etc., etc. And they said, basically, we have to protect Ukrainian skies, whatever it takes. And I think it's very important that we realize basically install a kind of no-fly zone over Ukraine. And certainly it will have also consequences for our own security in NATO countries and EU countries.
Do you think this is going to happen, sir? Do you believe in that this is, I mean, don't get me wrong.
Oh, well, I do hope, and we have certainly to push forwards. But, we remember, at the beginning of the war, some people say, oh, no, we cannot send to Ukraine fighter jets. We cannot send to Ukraine long-range missiles. That will be a kind of escalation, they said. And I think that right now we have, certainly to do much more. Certainly, it's too late. I was the one who was advocating as early as February 24th, 2022, sending certainly missiles or, any kind of weapons against the Russian tanks in Ukraine. And I think right now we have to do the same. And we have certainly, because that's a perfect compliance with the law, and especially the Article 51 of the UN Charter, we can help Ukraine basically downing all the drones and missiles. And if it's not enough, we could also target the launchers, even if those launchers are in Russian territory.
Absolutely. And I mean, that would be a great and very firm base for negotiations with dictator Putin, I believe. So, but Ukraine...
And if I may have just a very, very quick point, I heard, just 5 days ago, I think, Radek Sikorski, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Poland, and basically is agreed with these proposals that we made. And I think that's the first step. Of course, others must follow right now.
Let's take it as the first step. I'd like to see further steps. Well, I mean, let me make a statement and you agree or disagree with that. Ukraine is not accepted in NATO because NATO is weak and afraid of Russia. Do you believe this is the case?
Well, I think that personally I support certainly, since the very beginning and before even the all-out war launched by Russia, the membership of Ukraine to NATO. I think that, first of all, Russia must not have any kind of veto. First of all, it's not provocation, it's not escalation, that's a kind of right. And I think that will be certainly great, as we say, I know that's a joke, if right now NATO could join Ukraine. Certainly it will be a very great added value for NATO countries, because certainly Ukraine has the most powerful and skillful army, in Europe. But having said that, I know there are some countries who are still reluctant, but less. Of course, I think the US right now is reluctant. Of course, Slovakia and Hungary, as we know, for obvious reasons. But no, if I consider what Chancellor Merz was saying, some months ago, it seems that Germany, who opposed, Ukraine joining NATO at the Vilnius summit in 2023, could agree. And I think we have to move forward.
Okay.
Having said that, I also know that NATO is not a perfect security guarantee. I remember, that I don't remember, I think it was Yermak who said at the very early stage of the war that what we need, what Ukraine needs, but also other countries as well, is a kind of Article 5 plus, not Article 5 plus. It means that there must be a kind of automaticity because
Exactly.
the decision mechanism in NATO is the unanimity, and if you have one country saying, okay, we do not accept the Article 5 claim by, let's say, Ukraine or any other country, then everything could stop. So there must be something, certainly bolder, and the best defense of Ukraine is certainly Ukraine itself.
Exactly. Well, I mean, this is what we are observing now. I mean, everything is stalled. I'm talking about the Ukrainian NATO or NATO in Ukraine. Yet NATO is craving Ukrainian experience in fighting modern drone fare, and Poland sends, I mean, experts, right? So-called experts to Ukraine. And other countries just as well. Obviously, for NATO, Ukraine is looking good enough for something to be taken from it for NATO, but not good enough. Ukraine is not good enough to let Ukraine in NATO. Well, let me be frank with you. Ukraine is treated like a bastard at a nobility's castle, not accepted to the main feast's table with others, yet still useful enough to be somewhat fed to the point so it could keep on deterring a Russian bear that is growling right there at the castle's door, while nobles are trying to appease it rather than shoot it dead. Well, we agree on that, but you already almost answered that question. You still think that we need more pressure and more time politically to show that it is not the right position and Ukraine should be accepted into NATO, or maybe indeed there is no need for Ukraine to be in NATO. Maybe Ukraine is a NATO itself.
In a way, I mean, you're perfectly right. But I think, it's also a matter of principles. And I think principles matter in international relations. And I think that Ukraine must be free to choose its alliance. That's always already, enshrined, in the marble of the Declaration of Paris of 1990. Right. And it's very important, including, of course, military alliances. And I have to recall each and every day that NATO is a defensive alliance. So basically, any country that has no purpose of aggression should not be afraid of NATO. So let's be clear. If Russia is so afraid right now of NATO, and we remember Putin said that he was not, 20 years ago, it's also only because Russia has an aggressive purpose, and this aggressive purpose will not stop on the borders of Ukraine. And some things that we know, just before his departure, the head of staff of the military forces of France said that in 2030 or even before, Russia, if we do nothing, will be strong enough to aggress militarily, because it's already aggressing the EU countries from another point of view, what we call, cyber threats, or more generally speaking, kind of hybrid threats as well, but could be strong enough to aggress another country. So, I mean, the earlier we deter Russia in Ukraine, the less the risk will be for the years to come for Europe itself. I mean, that's a very, in my view, very important point. I mean, we are still procrastinating. That's why I said before that, I was in favor of a military interventions already 3.5 years ago. What have I said? Basically, it was 11 years ago, in 2014. I was already that, in the mind that we should have acted after, the aggression on Donbass and the illegal annexation of Crimea. And I think that's something which is important to know. And I mean, no, we are still, making Russia more powerful, even if it's not enough. And certainly is not a real great power, as we know, because its economy is collapsing, its military is collapsing. Just look, in 3.5 years of total war against Ukraine, it was not able, to defeat this so-called, in their mind, small nations that was Ukraine. So basically, but still, I mean, if we give Russia more time, because Russia, is now in a state of war economy, it could be a more dangerous power than it is now.
Well, absolutely. I mean, in figures, well, not figures, maybe, is a matter of fact, that Russia controls now less territory than it actually controlled when it started the invasion of Ukraine. But let's forget about NATO for now in our conversation, assuming that Ukraine does not gain any NATO membership in the nearest future. what do you see as a realistic security architecture? Because obviously Europe needs some kind of a security architecture with Ukraine in it. Is it a new alliance?
Well, I mean, it's of course very difficult not to envision, I mean, Ukraine being a member of NATO. But having said that, I mean, the very basis of a kind of security architectures for Europe with Ukraine in it, of course,
Right.
is to defeat Russia in Ukraine. I mean, if we are talking very seriously about, security in Europe, I think that Ukraine must win. And by victory of Ukraine, I mean the full liberations of the Ukrainian territories under Russian yoke. And I will explain that very briefly. Just imagine, and some people are saying, well, we have to accept that Ukraine could cede some of its territories, part of the Donbass, or well, Crimea is lost, or whatever. Just imagine that. We perfectly know, and that was pointed out by Alexandra Matvichuk, very recently, that we have 1.5 million children and toddlers that could be completely brought into the Russian army as cannon fodder, fighting against Ukraine, against their brothers and sisters, but also fighting against Europe. 1.5 million, just imagine. And certainly that's something that could happen if, the Ukrainian territories remain Russians. And I think that's why it's not acceptable to make any territorial concessions, of course, from a humanitarian point of view, because we know that in those territories, each and every day we are witnessing torture, collective rapes, deportation of children, summary executions, but also from a security perspective. And just imagine also that, well, Crimea remains Russian. Then you have, of course, the military basis of Sebastopol. That, of course, could be a direct threat, not only for Ukraine, but also for all the countries bordering the Black Sea. And because, I mean, it was a great success of the Ukrainian military, basically, to destroy or to prevent any Russian warships to come, in the Black Sea. And basically, they freed the Black Sea. But if we have a kind of agreement, of course, the Russian fleet will come back to the Black Sea, and that will be a major threat. That's why, I think that we must not talk about negotiation with Russia. We must not talk about concession, with Russia, and especially territorial concessions with Russia. We must not talk about, peace talks. And I think those kind of narratives, in my view, are very dangerous. Even the narrative, well, of course, it's up to Ukraine to decide which territory it could basically cede to Russia. I mean, no, we NATO countries or EU countries and also all allies, in Japan, in Australia, etc., they have to state very clearly there must be no territorial concessions. And I think that's a prerequisite of, any kind of security architecture, as you put it.
Thank you so very much for that detailed answer. Well, a couple of questions more. Donald Trump recently obviously called on Europe to stop purchase Russian oil and gas to stop fueling Russia's war chest. My question is, so what? Don't get me wrong, it's a good thing, but I mean, is that a possible to do, so to say, task in general, to stop buying Russian gas and oil for Russia just like that? Because it didn't happen for 4 years.
Certainly, well, it's certainly not an easy task, but that's something that we must do. We already cut most, of course, of the gas supplies to European countries, but still we have LNGs, Russian LNGs going to some countries, including mine, and I think that's not acceptable. We have also oil going to Slovakia and Hungary mostly. And we have not yet enacted, in Europe, secondary sanctions. I am not talking, about tariffs, but the secondary sanctions against the countries, mostly, namely, China and
Right.
India, still buying, Russian oil. And I think we can do that. We can do that. We are, of course, moving forwards too slowly, but if I well understand some statements made by the EU chairs, Mrs. von der Leyen, Kaja Kallas, and some others, I think we are moving towards the direction, but it's really too slow. And I think we have certainly to enact right now. We are now in the 18th package. There will be the 19th package very soon. We have to enact, I will say, the mother of all sanctions. I know it's difficult because
Right.
we have in the EU Hungary and Slovakia on board, and that's of course an obstacle. But I think we have certainly to be bolder, and we must use
Right.
all the tools at our disposal to sanction Russia. But sanction is not enough. Let's be very clear on that. I mean, basically, what we need is, of course, to provide Ukraine more, decisive weapons, fighter jets. We must supply more long-range missiles, and certainly Europe has to do that because I am not confident that the US and Trump will do.
We all are not so much just as well. So, last question for today. For all the tremendous amount and the terrible nature of war crimes Russia has perpetrated, including, as you mentioned, collective rapes and children abduction and all that outrageous things, we know that preparations are underway to launch a special tribunal against Russia. Does Europe has enough political will, you think, despite all the complexity of the matter and pressure from Russian side just as well, to do what it takes to make the special tribunal for Russian crimes actually functioning?
Well, I think that certainly there is right now such willingness by most of the head of states and government in the EU. Certainly not all of them. Some are still reluctant, but also I think that's certainly something that we must do. There could be no peace and no security as well
Just true.
without justice. And so basically we have basically two tribunals. We have the special tribunal you were alluding to, which is the tribunal for the crimes of aggression. And I think that's very important to have these tribunals because that's basically a crime of aggression, if what we call the crime of leaderships. And basically Putin and his cronies are basically targeted by these tribunals. But we must have still, we must give more means to the international criminal courts for all the other crimes, and namely all the crimes also committed by Russia, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and crimes of genocide. And I have to remind of the fact that under the conventions of December 9th, 1948, the deportation of children is a crime of genocide. And the forced enrollment of those children, the fact that the Russians tried to erase their national identity, is also a crime of genocide. And what I regret is that we don't have enough world leaders and democratic leaders in Europe and other countries speaking each and every day about those crimes. I think it's very important also to make the public opinion understand what's at stake with the very principles of humanity, of democratic and liberal and open societies, that, Russia is committing those crimes on a daily basis. It's very important because I think that the public opinion in many countries, including in my country, in France, or also in Italy, or in Belgium, in Spain, etc., they are not understanding the very nature of Putin's war, which is a war of extermination.
Thank you so very much, again, for your position, for your stance, for your expertise, and most of all, for your time. I hope for another conversation as soon as you have time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye. I am Henry Keane. We are UATV, and we just talked to an amazing person, academic, writer, and editor Nicolas Tenzer. Thank him and thank you for watching, and stand with Ukraine as it stands for you, believe it or not, in this fight for freedom and sovereignty. Stay tuned to UATV for more. Goodbye. Subscribe to UATV English and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.